Okay, well, I'm Judy Hibbs with Cooperative Extension, and I have the last part on the agenda here today, and it's talking about the meat of how you put all the dossier information together and make it a nice little package. So the very first thing that you need to start off with, and you've heard this from both of our other speakers this morning, is to know the guidelines. And there's a couple of ways that you can know the guidelines. First of all, you can look in this book, and Mark is always Steve is always very generous with these books. So every time I go to a meeting, he has a stack of these books that he's handing out. So there are opportunities to get your hands on these books. But if you don't, you can also go to the website, and that link will get you right to the website. In the guidelines book, it seems like every time the committee meets, the revisions committee meets every 2 years, and it seems like every time we meet, after the book is printed, there's like one more thing that we catch. And we noticed recently that in the guidelines books, this link is listed 2 different ways, but if you click either one of those choices that you see in the book, you will get to the right page. So the first thing to do in getting started is to read the guidelines and know what those are. And so if you go to the website, if you do click on one of those links and go to the website, this is what it looks like. And you'll eventually need to find your way to this website anyway, because one of the forms that you're going to need is on that website. So you can actually go, click on it, and fill it out. And we'll talk about that here in a few minutes as we work our way through this. Okay, so the very first section in the dossier is this cover letter that your dean or your director or your department head will write on your behalf. And they usually do a really good job, but my suggestion would be to try to become involved in helping them write that letter. You might give them some ideas of things that you want to make sure get highlighted in the letter, especially if there's a lot of people in your unit that are going up for promotion. The dean or director is having to write a lot of these letters, so I'm sure they will appreciate some help. But when he or she writes this, it talks about the whole scope of your work and the quality and the depth of your job performance. It also talks about your contribution to profession. A lot of the times we see the deans and directors actually pull out little snippets of information from maybe some of your evaluation letters or from something that you put in the impact body of your dossier. They're just kind of reiterating what others have said in your dossier. The letter might talk about your involvement with university service, but in the long run, it is the absolute capstone of the dossier. It's weighed very, very heavily by the committee members. So work with your dean or director to make sure you get a good letter to begin with. Sometimes when Steve is addressing a group like this, he'll talk about how different people read dossiers. Some people start with a director's letter. Some people start at the back and work toward the front. Some people start in the middle and work to both ends. But eventually that director's letter or the dean's letter is going to be very, very important to your dossier. The next section is probably the longest, fattest part of the dossier. It's the vita. And it can be a summary of your entire career. So if you've had a long career, it could be long. You could have a lot of pages in your vita. But it basically is a biographical summary of what you've done. Data, professional experience, your career accomplishments, and as I mentioned, it can span your entire career. One thing that you want to make sure that you do when you're working on your vita is start from today and work backwards. So you list all your activities in reverse chronological order. So what you've done in 2013 will be, rise to the top, and then 2012, 2011, and work yourself backwards. A lot of times, people will call Steve and Mark and I, and what they're really looking for is a recipe on how to put these dossiers together. And there's no cookie cutter method, there's no recipe. These are all individual dossiers, and if yours looks different than your neighbor's, that's okay. The most important thing is to have all the criteria that are in these guidelines covered some way. And to also have it reader-friendly so that the committee can easily find that you do meet all those criteria. But there are some suggested sections that you might want to put in there. And as I mentioned, these are just suggestions. You don't have to organize them like you see on these slides. You can do your own thing. But the resume or the biographical information about yourself is usually put at the beginning of the dossier, where you have your name, your title, your organization, your current rank, maybe your telephone number, and the telephone number is kind of important. I've been working with this committee for about 11 years now, and we have in the past called people if we have questions about something that they put in their dossier, and we feel like we need just a little bit more information about it. We'll call you and we'll track you down and see if we can ask you those questions. You might want to also put your education. There's been a lot of discussion already about the terminal degree, and I will reemphasize what Mark said earlier. There's been a lot of successful candidates that don't have the terminal degree. So please don't let that be a barrier to you submitting your dossier. But it is true that you need to have established a pretty big body of work. And as we talk about some of these things that are considered body of work, you'll see what we're talking about. Also in the resume, your what you've been doing in your employment. If you've been with the university for all these years, but you've had different positions, or even what you did before you came to the university can also be included in this professional appointments and employment. Another section that you might want to include in your vita would be professional and academic service. So things that you've done with university committees, maybe professional association activity that you've accomplished, professional memberships and awards and honors might be something that you'd like to put in your vita. If you've been a leader in conferences or held some other kind of leadership role in professional development associations, you might want to include that as well in your vita. Committee assignments, if you've had some big event that you coordinated, that can go in here as well. If you've given any kind of presentation that you've given, whether it's internal, external, this can all go in your vita. Also, many of you have mentoring experiences, so you can put those kind of things as well in your vita. Some other information that you might want to include in your vita would be things that might be considered programmatic accomplishments. Things like presentations and trainings, instruction that you've been invited to, or invited lectures that you've given. If you've exhibited or had poster presentations, those could also go in. If you are involved in media, whether it's written or video or radio, those kind of things can be included in your vita as well. If you're a good grant writer and you've been prolific in getting money for your programs, that's also important to include in your vita. Talk about those grants and those financial awards that you've gotten, and also what you've done with those grants and financial awards that you've been presented. Many of you are involved in applied research. So you might want to include that in your vita, talk about what you've done, and as Mark put it, the so what of why you've done that and what has that applied research has led to. And then one thing that you've already heard a lot about, and you'll hear several more times during my presentation, is collaborative programming. So make sure that you include that in your vita as well. Another section that you might have some entries in would be educational development. Some of us are presenters, we present information. Some of us as public service faculty actually develop that information. Maybe you're one that develops and presents. So there's a way that you can fold that into your dossier as well and talk about publications that you've developed, maybe books that you've written or chapters of books that you've written, articles. If you've actually been the one to develop an exhibit that has been displayed by yourself or maybe even by others, you can include that in your dossier in the VITA portion, the portion of the VITA section. If you developed any kind of curricula or any kind of materials really, can go in this VITA. And then other information that you might want to consider including would be professional development, because remember, as Mark was talking about the different criteria, and you want to show a documented record of growth and development. So how can you show a documented record of growth and development? You can present at conferences, or you can attend conferences. You can have classes or courses, or you can start another degree. Maybe you don't have your master's degree or your doctorate degree, and you feel like now's the time to do that. Also, even things like non-academic professional development. If you've had an opportunity to study abroad or be on a team that goes to another country to have a cultural immersion in that country, then those kind of non-academic professional developments also look well in a VITA. And then also some of you may have supervision or administrative responsibilities, so there's always a place for that in a VITA if you want to include that as well. Many or probably all of us have contributions that we've made to our community in public service to the community at large, and there's a way that you can fold that into the VITA as well. Okay, so the next section is your job description. And think long and hard about what you put in your job description, because that is what everything else in your dossier is going to be weighted against. Some of us have an opportunity to write our own job description. Some of us have, set finite job descriptions that we work, within those realms. Make sure that whatever you put in the next section that I talk about, which is the achievement section, make sure whatever you put in that achievement section ties back to your job description. So if you say that it's your job to do XYZ, and we look in your achievement section and we don't see anything about XYZ, then that's a real red flag. So just make sure that those two sections will kind of mesh together. Now the job description is only 3 pages. And another question that we get a lot is, what if I've had 3 jobs in the last 4 or 5 years? Can I have 3 pages for each of my 3 jobs? And the answer is no, you can have 3 pages. So if you've had 3 jobs, you might want to put 1 job per page. Or if you've had 2 jobs, maybe a page and a half per job. But you have a total of 3 pages for that whole job description. And I would encourage you to do that. If you've had multiple jobs and that is going to be reflected in your achievement section, then I would encourage you to make sure that you encompass all those responsibilities in your job description. But so some of the things that it needs to include would be your academic preparation, your experience, those required skills and attributes that you need to have been hired into that position, and the responsibilities that you have in your position. Okay, section D is your documentation of achievements. And so this is another capstone piece of your dossier, because this is the information that the committee looks at probably the most strongly, because it's what you've done since your last promotion, what you've done since your appointment, if you haven't been promoted since your appointment. So it only goes back since your last promotion. So if you are going up to be an associate and you were promoted 4 years ago, then that's the information that needs to go into this documentation section. If you've not gone up for promotion since you were appointed 7 years ago, then the whole 7 years of that span can be included in this documentations of achievement. But it's a really important piece, and one of the things that you want to do is to describe your most significant contributions. Now the VITA that we talked about is real lengthy, it spans your whole career, So this is not, intended to span your whole career. It's just to talk about, the most significant things that you've done since your last promotion or your appointment. But things that you might want to make sure that you do are make sure that you look at the guidelines and all these things that are criteria, make sure you address those somehow, and make sure you address it where the committee can see it. So, so again, I can would stress to make it reader friendly, and label your sections so that if the reader is looking for collaborative efforts, they can find you collaborative efforts. If they're looking for a regional or national reputation, make sure they can find that. But so you might want to explain your collaborative efforts. And when you're explaining collaborative efforts, make sure you also talk about your role and why this is a collaboration. So if Mark invited me to go with him and speak with something that the Institute of Government is doing, I'm not sure that would be a collaboration. I was invited to be a speaker. There's room for that in my dossier. But the committee probably will not consider that a collaboration. So what is it about what you've done that really makes it a collaboration? Does it span a length of time with these group of people? Have you made significant impact in the audience that you're trying to work with? What is it about that really makes it a collaboration? And also, what your role in that collaborative effort is. And be honest. Sometimes, if you're not completely honest, you might be stuck with somebody on that committee that knows the real story, and that doesn't work out very well in the end. Some other things that you might want to put in this documentation of achievement is to emphasize this impact that you've done, the results, the outcomes, the so what of what you've done in your programming or in your responsibility. I mentioned clarify your role in your work. And also try to do some kind of cross-referencing. Now you don't have to cross-reference back to your Vita, so no cross-referencing to the Vita. But you do want to cross-reference between your achievement section and what you put in your achievement section as your supporting material. So for example, if I wrote in my achievement section that I was a conference speaker at a national conference, I was an invited speaker, it might be nice to cross-reference that with some evidence that I was actually there speaking at that conference. This was actually a little bit of an issue with our committee this year, and when you go up for promotion, you never really know who's going to be on the committee and how stodgy they're going to be about their recommendations. So it's kind of a luck of the draw as to who you get on the committee. But this year, we had some pretty tough, this past year, we had some pretty tough committee members that if you said it, they wanted to see evidence of it. So if I had a collaboration with SBDC, somewhere in my evidence or some letter of evaluation that is in my dossier, they wanted to see something from SBDC to kind of prove that you really did do what you said. And as Mark mentioned earlier, you can't put 32 conference proceedings in there if you've got other things that you want to put in there as well, because we are limited on our pages, which is the next bullet here. That section of documentation of achievements is 30 pages total. So whatever you write as your narrative, plus whatever you put in there as your supporting evidence to show that you did do that, all of that combined is 30 pages.
Could I ask you a question?
Sure.
Is the 30 pages the entire dossier or just that last piece you were talking about?
The 30 pages is the achievement section. So the section D that talks about your significant contributions and what you've done in since your last promotion or your last appointment. The question was about how long what that 30 pages encompasses, and it is just your that documentation of achievements. So if you write something narrative about your contributions to your profession, and then you also put in some supporting evidence, all of that together is 30 pages. Okay, so the last section of the dossier are your letters of evaluation. And think really hard about who you want to ask to write these letters for you. You can only have 5, but it is common to ask for more than 5, because what if you ask for 5 and somebody doesn't follow through? And so the committee sees your dossier and you only have 4 letters in there, and they're thinking, can't this person get another letter? What happened here? So it is common to ask for more than 5, but you can only include 5 in your dossier. And that includes the whole dossier. So if you ended up with 6 or 7 letters and you picked out the 5 that you wanted to go in section E, you cannot use the other 2 in your documentation of the section. Question?
Shouldn't these letters be private?
No.
No?
Okay, that's a good question, and the question was, you can switch to it if you want. There's been a lot of debate about the letters, but the stance of the public service promotion is that we are an open promotion system. So we can see the letters, we can ask for the letters, we can even suggest to the letter writers some things that they might want to include to make sure they have a nice, strong letter for you. It is not a blind, it's not like tenure promotion where it's a blind review. So you can see, you have the opportunity to be involved in that.
Does the dean or director have the option of choosing any on their own?
The question there was, does the dean and director have the option to choose? Here again, in public service promotion, we're just a little different than tenure, and I would hope that your dean or director would give you the opportunity to suggest these people, because you're the one that knows who you've been working with, and it's a little different where like tenure promotion is just kind of sent out to people that might be an expert in the field, and they might not know you, might not have even worked with you. But in public service promotion, we're asking for people that know our work, and that's a real positive benefit for us. That hopefully we'll get some real strong letters like that. In these letters, you want to emphasize, make sure at least one of your letters emphasizes this regional or national or international reputation that you're going to say that you have. In fact, think about all of the different criteria in your dossier and see if you can find someone to write a letter to speak to each of these issues. So if you're trying to establish a regional or national reputation, who can write a letter to help me establish that? If you're trying to establish that you've collaborated with another public service unit or another academic unit, who can write me a letter to show evidence that I've done that? So think about what you're trying to point out to the committee members and who can help you establish that evidence. One thing about these letters that's very important is that they can't be just good old attaboy kind of letters. They need to be critical, they need to be evaluative, they need to be reflective of what you've done in your role that you've worked with this person, or what they have evaluated your role as being. The letters would evaluate the candidate's impact. Now, one thing that kind of goes along with your question, these letters are actually requested by the dean and director, and there's a set form letter. The dean and director can write their own letter if they want to, but there is a set form letter in your guidelines book, so you can see what it looks like. But so they're requested by the dean and director. The letters do come back to the dean and the director, but I would hope and I would encourage you to work with your administrator to make sure that you have some level of input into that. One thing that you do want to include with these letters are references. So, I mean, not like a whole page of reference, but just a little paragraph or a few sentences about who this person is, what their background or reputation is, and what that means to why you've asked them to be a letter writer for you. I mentioned including that letter that the dean and director is going to write to request. And then here's something new that I think will be really positive, because people in the past have really struggled with signatures. And before, we've always required original signatures. So this is, I hope, going to be a really positive change, that now we can accept electronic signatures. And, you know, most of us are writing letters and sending them through email as it is. So this time we don't have to wait on the slower mail service. Okay, one last section in your dossier is called the recommendation for promotion, and there's two pieces of it. Piece number one is called the recommendation form, and you can find this on page 18 of your guidelines, or you can click on this link. And this is what I mentioned earlier. If you go to that Public Service and Outreach website, you're going to eventually want to find your way to that website, because you can click on this link and actually fill out this form online. So it's got the little fields that you just type right in, and then you can print it off and it'll be done. It is only one page, and since it's a set form, it's only going to allow you to be one page. But the next section and this is what it looks like. And as I mentioned, it's in your book, so you can see that. But the next part of that recommendation for promotion is a summative narrative, a summary narrative. And this is also one page, and one page only. But this part you write, and you can encompass, you know, everything that you put in your dossier, but remember that you only have one page. So be concise, be clear, really emphasize those significant contributions, collaborative efforts, reputation, impact, that kind of thing that you've had in your work and in your service to public service. In a nutshell, this is your elevator speech. So if you found your way on an elevator with the provost, who I do have on my bullets here, that the provost does read this section, and probably the president reads this section also. If they don't read anything else in your dossier, they see this. So if you find yourself on an elevator with the provost, and you had 3 floors to tell him everything that you've done, how are you going to do it? So this is really just like the hardcore nutshell of what you've done in your significant contribution. So one page. Remember that a lot of us that serve on these committees are old. We don't read font very well if it's teeny tiny. So about maybe 10 is about as small as you probably need to go.
You would let it go as small as 10?
With my glasses, I can read 10 font. And maybe a magnifying glass too. But I'm willing to read it if it's that small.
I wouldn't suggest your dossier be that. We're talking about your summary sheet.
Yeah, just that one page.
Oh, okay.
The dossier, I
I
wouldn't.
was going,
No.
whoa.
Yeah. No. Well, if you're trying to, if you have a lot to put in your documentation of achievements and you only have 30 pages, I guess you could be a little creative with that. But on this summary narrative form, if you only have one page to get the whole guts of your dossier into it, then it's okay to do. But here are the things that you want to cover: your budgeted and assigned duties, your professional achievements, any publications, award, honors, contracts, grants, and then really anything else that you think is significant that you want to put on that page. Just a few points to keep in mind. As I mentioned at the very first of our presentation, there's no recipe, there's no cookie cutter press, there's no right way or wrong way. The only thing that might be a deal breaker is that if you completely leave out something that is listed as a criteria. But other than that, you can put this dossier together pretty much any way you want to. But just a few things that you might want to keep in mind. A table of contents is always important to include. That way the readers can find information easily. Make sure you consider that job description. I talked about how important that is and how important it is to clarify the roles that you have in collaborative efforts. This is just a little nitpicky thing, so it's not a real deal breaker, but writing in third person always looks good in a dossier. Using action words always looks good in a dossier. I even have a list of action words that I've collected over the years that I'll be happy to send you if you want to email me. But think about quality versus quantity. It doesn't have to be a big, fat, heavy dossier to be a good dossier. You can have a lot of good quality in a less pages. One thing that might actually end up being a little bit of a deal breaker is if you have a lot of errors in your dossier. The committee kind of does a lot of chinking about that. You know, you have a lot of, they wonder, why is your dossier have all these typos in it? And it is true that, when I'm looking at something I've written and I've read it over and over and over and over again, then, your eyes just miss some things. So it may not be your fault. So what you might want to consider doing is getting you a reader buddy, maybe 2 reader buddies, and having them look at it as well. So definitely proofread. And then I just wanted to emphasize, when you get to these 2 upper levels, there's a lot at stake. If you're trying to achieve the associate level or the senior associate level, there's a lot riding on that. There's a lot of work that you have to do in the last few years or in your career. There's a lot riding on it as far as the standing that you have in your organization, maybe even the like a promotional raise that you might receive that would be important to your family as well. So there's really a lot riding on these upper 2 levels. So make sure that you turn in a dossier that addresses all of these criteria. Now, the demonstrated impact is really important, and I'm glad that that it's about time that we've said this out loud. For the last 11 years, when I've been working with the promotion committee, I remember Dr. Dunning when he first worked to get all this started. He would talk about how just doing a good job will not get you promoted. You've got to step outside of that box and do the extra things. And the revisions committee this year felt like the pendulum had kind of swung a little bit too far toward those extra things. Not that they're not important and not that you should, you need to make sure they're in your dossier. But now the pendulum has swung back a little bit and we're emphasizing the impact that you do in the good job that you do. So that's going to be really important for you to address that. What have you done? Why is that important? How have you impacted the audience that you've worked with? And what has happened because of that? So demonstrated impact. This reputation is critical. If you are trying to achieve associate level, you've got to show the committee that you have either a regional or a national reputation. And regional is defined by anything that's out of your area. So if you're a county agent, then anything out of that county can be regional. If you are somebody that has a district, then anything out of that district, or if you have statewide responsibilities, it's got to be out of that state to be considered regional. But make sure you got it in there. Make sure that you show evidence of it. The collaboration, make sure it's in there, because it's not going to do you any good to work on your dossier and have it turned down because you've missed one of these important points. Collaboration is very important. And at the associate level, we're just looking for collaboration with another public service unit, or another college or another academic unit. And another positive change that both the guys have already talked about this morning is the expanding of what that means as far as another institute of higher education. If you're out in the state and you've been working with technical colleges, you got it now. You can put this in your dossier as an institute of higher education. If you've been working with private institutions that aren't USG, if you've been working across state lines with other colleges that are on the border of Georgia, then this is going to be a really positive change for you guys. And then that documented record of professional growth and development that we talked about earlier. And then for the seniors, the stakes get even higher for the senior associate. And so you need that impact, you need that reputation at either a national or an international level for the senior associates. And then the collaboration has to be more, there's more depth to the collaboration. So you've got to have the collaboration with both another public service unit or another institute of higher education. And be real careful because the committee members are pretty astute, so don't try to put one thing in there and count for both. So like if you work for Cooperative Extension and you're working with Cooperative Extension at University of Florida, don't try to use that as another public service unit and also another higher education institution, because I don't believe that's going to work for you. So just keep that in mind. And then this next piece is something new, but it shouldn't be too much of a shock, because over the years, the people that are being promoted to senior associates, we've been seeing that they are contributing to the body of knowledge or practice. They're doing some kind of scholarly work, where it might be publications, or it might be co-authoring something that someone else is the lead author on. That's okay, as long as it's peer-reviewed. If you are invited to be a speaker at a conference, even if you're the one that put forth the application to want to speak at this conference, at some point it's going to be peer-reviewed, because there's a committee looking to see if they're going to invite you to speak at that conference. So that would be, evidence of your contributing to the knowledge or body of work, or the practice of work. One thing just to keep in mind about that, if you do present at a conference, or if you do a poster at a conference, make sure that it's not just talking about your program. Make sure that it's taking that one extra step about how can someone else apply what I've done and make it work in their program. So that's what we mean about making those contributions to knowledge or practice. How can you impart what you've done, but make it worthwhile for others that are viewing your work. And then the last bullet there is your professional growth and development. Steve mentioned some of this. I'm just going to quickly reemphasize it. The submission procedure is only one hard copy this year, and then the rest of it is going to be electronic. But for your one hard copy, we're still asking for binders that don't have D-rings. And the reason why we don't like D-rings is because they tend to fall open and everything falls out. And then Miss Sherry has to put it all back together, and she gets nervous about that. So just get you a really good binder that won't come open when it's transported around. Plastic sleeves we don't use a lot anymore now that the dossiers have gotten kind of smaller. There may be something really delicate that you feel like needs a plastic sleeve, and that's okay. But for the most part, no plastic sleeves. When you turn in this electronic copy, you're going to separate those 6 sections that I talked about, A, B, C, D, E, F, into 6 different files on your electronic CD or flash drive or whatever you put it on. And this whole thing about searchable versus non-searchable, when you're working on your dossier and it's in like a Word format, like a word processing format, then you're gonna somehow convert it to a PDF before you upload it to the website. Make sure when you convert it to the PDF that you convert it in a way that it can be searchable. And this is, in addition to the table of contents, this is going to be a really easy way for the committee to hone in on things that are really important. So if I were reading your dossier and I wanted to make sure that you had evidence of collaboration, I might just do a word search for collaboration and see where it is in that whole body of dossier. And one way that you can kind of test yourself is when you do convert it to a PDF, go up to the top and click on Word Find, type in national or regional or collaboration or scholarly or something like that, and see if you see what pops up on your computer screen. Now, we do realize that some parts are not going to be searchable, because if you have documents that you're going to scan and upload, obviously they're not going to be searchable. These letters that your dean or director are getting, they're going to be scanned, so they're not going to be searchable. But the main part that you write, that's kind of what we're asking for. And here again, those are our emails. You can email any of us, Steve, Mark, Judy. All three of us are willing to help, willing to give our advice based on what we've seen over the years. We're still, this is a living process, so it's changing and doing something a little different. And here again, as I mentioned earlier, the makeup of the committee sometimes has a lot to do with it as well. But we're more than willing to tell you what we've learned from our experience with the process. Okay, questions here in Athens?
Yes, I'm wondering if you can speak just a little bit more about what are some examples of the type of evidence that people put in. So for example, you were talking about a committee member might want some proof that you were at a conference, so would just an abstract of your talk be appropriate, or like the first page of a publication? Because obviously if you have a 20-page publication, you don't want to be putting that whole thing in there
Right,
because
exactly.
you only have 30 pages. So I'm just wondering if you could give some examples of some types of things that you can.
The question was about examples of evidence. So if I say that I've spoken at a conference, how am I going to prove that? And here again, you don't have to prove everything that you put in there because you only have 30 pages. So think about what your most significant things are that you want to point out. So and also think about those criteria that I just emphasized as being very important. So if you have something that you think was significantly impactful, what are you going to put in there to prove it? So, for instance, if I were working with let's say that I worked with someone and because of that, their whole life changed, or they made significantly, like some of our agricultural agents work with farmers and they save like hundreds of thousands of dollars. Well, you might just put, you could put a letter from, like that person that you worked with that appreciates your work, that could be one thing. Now that's not to confuse that with the letters of evaluation, because this could be an email, it could be a handwritten note, it could be anything. If you're trying to show evidence of your national or your regional reputation, how are you going to do that? How have I gotten my reputation? Have I been a speaker? Have I gotten a lot of things published? Have I been a poster presenter at a lot of conferences? So what is it that I'm trying to show that I did? So an abstract in your case would be an example. 1 or 2 pages of the program agenda might be an example. If there were conference proceedings and you want to just put in the page that your presentation or your poster was included on, that would work. So just anything that would show that. And then if you're trying to show evidence of collaboration, you might want to put in an agenda, maybe something that you've worked with that's got all of your organizations listed on it. It might even be a letter from somebody at that other organization that's written you and thanked you for what you're doing. And then And then another way to even emphasize that more strongly is to choose your letters of evaluators by thinking of all of these different criteria that you want to emphasize. And I had mentioned that earlier. Does that answer your question?
Let me add one other thing.
Okay.
If the director letter or the dean director is the capstone document, so it might be helpful for him or her to mention that in their capstone document, that your name is Catherine, published in the 3 of the most significant journals in her field, and had 15 publications. That's a way to help reference it, because you have your director backing you up, that you're saying it's in your dossier, it's in your vita, you mentioned it in your documentation section, but the director also says it. So any way you can do, like Judy said, that's the cross-referencing that folks see some consistency within that.
One thing that I might want to point out that I meant to say earlier is, after hearing our presentation, and I know a few of y'all are in here because you're thinking about doing your dossier in a couple of years, and it's really good to know now what the criteria is so you can start working toward that. But here again, if you turn a dossier that doesn't meet the criteria, that's not doing you any good. So if you've heard us say anything today and you don't feel like you're quite ready for it, don't do it. I would strongly encourage you to wait for another year or two and build this body of work and body of evidence that you need so that you can have a nice, strong dossier. Another thing I mentioned, how the committee members are pretty astute. So if you're trying to build your national reputation, and we see that all of your national exposure has been in 2012, and we're looking at the last 5 years of your work, then that's probably not going to work for you either. So just think about those kind of things, and really take this to heart and think about, is this your year, or should you give it just another year or two? Another question.
I was looking at my achievement documentation section, found if I put even single evidence for my activities, and I really can exit 30 pages quite easily. So can I write something that put some evidence, and so additional evidence can be provided on demand or something like that?
The question was about how do you get the basis of what he's asking is, how do you get everything you want in 30 pages? And we have seen some pretty creative ways to get those 30 pages. So if you have 2 agendas and you want to go into Publisher or some other kind of fancy way to put it all on one page, that's okay too. Good question. Yeah, we've seen some real creative documentation, so it's all good.
Regarding collaboration, if we have collaborated with other units or other universities on really competitive outside grants that they didn't get funded, does that count? I mean,
Okay, the question was about working as a collaborative with other units on a grant that didn't get funded. Well, I would think that's still a collaborative process. I mean, you don't have the impact to show, but you do have the work with the organization. Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I wouldn't weight that very high.
okay.
I mean, because you can't back it up by saying, we collaborated, this is my role, you can say that, but it only went for a limited period because you built it up. But there's no impact because you didn't do the work.
Okay.
So the prep stuff, I wouldn't put all the prep, I wouldn't put a list of all the things that failed, for lack of a better term. But if you want to show that you had a consistency of working with the University of Florida, here's some things that were funded, here's some things that we worked on that didn't get funded, but we used that to develop relationships to get something else funded, I think you could build a case that way. But if all 7 of your things are things that didn't get moved forward, I look at that with some suspect.
Yeah. Although, if you didn't get funded, but then you thought of another way to do that, then that's still, you're still collaborating with those people to reach some kind of outcome. because that happens to us a lot. You know, we want the money, and we don't get the money, but yet we somehow still figure out how to do the program, and we collaborate with those same people.
You know, I know this is focused on institutes of higher education, but there is like the Agricultural Research Service. And that is a significant collaborative partner for many of us who work in agriculture. So, doesn't count.
Yes, it does count, but not as a collaboration.
It certainly
Well,
would count in
I would count it,
demonstrated impact.
count it for your impact, count it for your national reputation, count it for your publications, but for your collaboration, right now, it doesn't count for that.
The question for those of you that are in Athens was about, you know, what if I'm working with a very significant institute, or like even in your local communities, what if I'm working with Farm Bureau or Community Connection or Family Connection or something pretty significant?
The governor's office.
The governor's office for family and children's or something like that. You know, it's still significant work, and it will definitely help you in that demonstrated impact portion of the criteria, but it just won't help you with the collaborative piece.
Let me add a little bit about the collaboration. The reason that collaboration came about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, is because Dr. Dunning, when he was the vice president, saw us working in silos and didn't see that higher education was applying its knowledge and resources to help solve the problems of the state. There was a lot of collaboration with other units that were non-higher education, but there wasn't as much of that type of work going on. So that's why that collaboration piece came into being about 12 years ago. So it was very tightly defined 12 years ago. You can only collaborate with public service and outreach units on campus. You can only collaborate with academic units on campus. So that has broadened a bunch, but still it's a requirement to try and show how we in higher education, using our resources to impact problems in the state or the nation or region or whatever.
But another way to try to make that work, let's say if you were working with the College of Family Consumer Sciences on the piece about farmers markets and food safety and that kind of thing, and then so that's a collaboration with another academic unit because you're not in the College of Family Consumer Sciences, and then I think that's a consortium of a bunch of states working on that. So that's a collaboration with other public service units. So just think about what you do and how it all kind of fits into the criteria. Other questions in Athens before we start going around to the others?
And so Judy, a federal agency work there would be under impact and not necessarily, even though it is defined as a collaboration, but not in the sense of public service promotion.
Right. The question was about federal agencies. So if you're working on some kind of grant with USDA, then that would be that could demonstrate your impact.
National reputation.
And your reputation for sure, because that would be at a national level. Other questions here in Athens? Okay, you may think of some more as we go around, but let's go to Cartersville. How about Cartersville? Got any questions?
No question.
Okay. Okay, Griffin.
No questions.
Statesboro?
Hey Judy, it's Joanne. I have a question. Is Brenda Rogers going to do the program she did last year, or is it archived?
Okay.
It was the thing on formatting and all that. It was very good.
All right, first of all, unfortunately, I think that's just for the College of Agriculture. So when I say this,
Okay.
everybody else is going to be mad. But I think that has been archived. I'll be happy to email Brenda or call her. But what she's talking about, if you've got some computer support people in your unit, you can call on them hopefully, to help you figure out how to convert to PDF and how to scan and those kind of technical kind of things that we may not do all the time in our jobs. But try to call on some support people. I'm pretty sure that when Brenda and Marcy did that, they did archive it. We just need to go back and find it, but I'll figure it out and we'll let you know. Any more questions from Statesboro?
Judy, this is Adele downstairs.
Okay, Adele.
It is archived. It is archived within the online promotion and tenure system on the county intranet.
Okay, so Adele, how would you get to that? And let me add one more question about that. Can people that are non-College of Agriculture get to that? Adele, are you still there?
Maybe. No, I'm here. I'm thinking about that. I don't, if they're non-college, I'd say no.
Okay, because it's on the intranet, you said.
Yes, it's on the college webpage under the county operations
Okay,
page.
okay,
I'll be
okay,
glad to resend that out.
okay.
But I just wanted to make note.
Okay, thank you. So Joanne, did you get that? It's on the intranet county operations, and Adele's going to send that out to everybody.
We did, thank you so much. We have another question.
Okay?
Yes, I work with a small business development center, and I write a lot of articles on entrepreneurship that end up published in different publications throughout the state. But some of them have been picked up outside the state of Georgia and in other publications and blogs. Either the whole article's been published or it's been quoted from, like, you know, a New York Times entrepreneurship blog and things like that. I mean, does that go toward national reputation?
We have had people make their case of evidence by using that kind. If they write an article and then they can show that it's been syndicated and picked up by other sources. If that's all you've done to establish a national reputation, that might be a little weak. So, but I think that would be one component of building your case.
Just one thing. Thank you.
If y'all would tell your name, Steve wants to know who you are.
This is Connie Edwards from the Small Business Development Center in Savannah.
Thank you.
And yeah, that's one of the things that I would like to use, but it's not the only thing.
Yeah, we've seen that as one component of building a reputation. Any other questions from?
Thank you.
Any other questions from Statesboro?
No.
Okay. How about Tifton?
We don't have any questions, thank you.
Okay. All right. Any last words here in Athens? All right. So we'll turn it back to Steve.
Okay, if you think of anything, we're going to hang around here for a little while in Athens, and we'll keep the mic on, so if you have a question, you want to hang around and talk amongst your group, we'll be here for another 15, 20 minutes or so. If we see everybody walking out on the television, we'll know it's time to leave. But we'll be around for one-on-one kind of stuff, and we'll split up around the room. We can do that. We can help you all. I wanted to just mention one last piece with the promotion process, just so that you have an idea of how this works. Beside whatever process you go through in your college or school or unit, all right, you have a vote depending on what rank you are. So if you're a representative, people that are assistants, associates, and seniors will probably vote on you. If you're an assistant, your associates, you're going up for associate, your associates and seniors will go up, will be voting on you. And if you're going in for senior, only your seniors will be voting on you, okay? Once your dossier is finished and completed, it's sent over to us, and then the process that we have at the university level is we have a multidisciplinary group from different colleges, schools, extension units, so it's made up of your colleagues, so to speak, again, at that rank or above. And we'll have 2 readers of your dossier that will do an in-depth read of your particular dossier, and they will present your dossier to the group. The rest of the committee is also responsible for reading your dossier, so all 15 members of that committee or 12 members of the committee depending on the size, will read your dossier and have this thorough discussion about your work. It's not just a Passover type of a process. Again, Judy has mentioned every once in a while, the committee might ask for additional information. That's why we need the phone number or email. That's fairly rare, but that does tend to happen every other year or so. They might want another document or talk to you on the phone or whatever it happens to be. So you might want to think about that day when we do promotion, you might be fairly flexible. You don't have to sit by a phone all day. I'm not suggesting that, but you might want to be fairly flexible just in case. So again, it's a process where it's a discussion. Folks really read that dossier. They take the time. They're given 6 weeks to read all the dossiers. The two people basically present your dossier, a first reader and a second reader, to have the collaboration or a discussion, conversation amongst your dossier, and then a secret ballot is taken, yes, no, and we discourage abstentions, and we pass that vote on. And again, for the appeals process, I will let you know that afternoon, and if I can't get a hold of you that Wednesday afternoon, I will call you first thing in the morning. I'll also call your department head or your dean, so they'll have an idea, so the clock starts running. Even though the requirement is 7 days, we give you more like 10 days or 11 days to kind of get your materials ready, if you'd like to appeal. And again, as Mark had said, the only additional information that is allowed is your director, dean, can add an additional letter emphasizing some of the things that the committee found as needing some additional attention. All right. You don't have to appeal, that's fine. We have many times that folks decide, no, there's too much there, I need to wait a year, come back in, or I need to reformat, or I need to get rid of all my typos. We've had a couple of folks that you can tell they did it 11th hour and they didn't proof it and it was a mess. And the committee doesn't respond well to stuff like that. I want to emphasize one other thing, the elevator speech. Judy's already emphasized that. I have had calls, even this year, from the provost asking questions about the elevator speech. So he does read the promotion. It's not dossier or the materials that he sent, especially the elevator speech. So make sure you take some time. I know it's a long process. It's the last piece. It's a one-pager. It's no big deal. It is a big deal. He takes a look at that, and then he looks at your vita and see what the consistency is with the vita. And I've had several questions for the provost about it. Just to emphasize another piece that Judy emphasized, when I read a dossier, the first thing I do is go to the back of the book, and I read the one-pager. So I get a sense of who you are and how concise you were able to put your qualifications on that one page. I go to the director's letter next, and then I work my way in. Or actually, then I read the letters from your external folks, and then I work my way in. So I want to see that, what they say about you, in the meat of your vita and your Section D. Thank you. Documentation. Yes, question? You have a question? I thought I saw a hand. Okay. All right. Just saw a couple little things. All right. Anything else? All right. I want to do one last thing. I want to thank folks again. Mark and Judy, thank you so much. They don't just do this today. They work on this all year round. We have appointments that they work on throughout the year. They help get the dossiers together. They work with the committee on a yearly basis. They work with you all on a yearly basis. Sherry Allen, who does everything else for me at my office. Adele Shiver, who we couldn't do this without, even though she's sort of a mystery voice downstairs. Adele, thank you very much. Polly, who makes this happen. And we have our filming again this year. Meredith? Merritt. Tony, thank you so much for Cooperative Extension's piece in this. We really do appreciate it, and thank you. This is not a scary process. It really isn't. We will encourage you all to put your best foot forward, to look forward to seeing your dossiers. And one last thing, I'm sorry. We have dossiers at the VP's office. If you want to come by our office and check those out, not check them out, but you can look at them while you're there. We can't let them leave the, you can check them out while you're there. You can't let them leave the office because they're originals. You can come by the office, we'll schedule some time, a private conference room. You can look through all the dossiers you want to look through. We've kept some of the best dossiers every year for the last couple of years. Again, there's a couple of little changes this year, but for the most part, they're really good dossiers. So come on by and look at them anytime. You can call Sherry and set up a time, you can take a look at them. All right? Thank you all. Good luck.